If you think or thought that Donald and Douglas are the one doing the slaughtering, I hate to break it to ya. Or for this matchup, we'll be using power scaling method as usual. Of course, some logic and realistic scaling here too and there. We'll be going over most of the feats from from Railway Series, model to CGI, as always, and determine who would win. This round would have be divided into two sections, where James faced both of them separately first, before the final round, where he fights them all at once. So where to begin? What is Donald and Douglas's best feat? Well, both of them have had a run-in with the signal boxes, brake van, hay cart, pits, and snow physically. They are both really smart and equally intelligent, with Douglas being the more serious and actioned one, such as rescuing Oliver from scrap and pulling out Donald from the pit, for instances. I don't know if the CGI feats are worth talking about, however, because, let's face it, they suck ass in terms of character, writings, and feats. James, on the other hand, well, he is more than capable of handling the express at high speed and power, especially up hills. Even in the earliest as season 1, he is able to hold goods trains at full power over Gordon's hills with little trouble at all, such as in troublesome trucks and dirty objects. Perhaps his best showings of strength was in Philip to the Rescues, where he was literally straining himself to prove Philip wrong. It did backfire, but it's definitely not something to laugh at. And of course, James is definitely faster, realistic, or feats wise. Bigger and heavier too. He has been in many more accidents, including pretty deadly ones. Potentially deadlies, that will make even Donald and Douglas's one looks like child play. And intellectually, well, he may not be as smart and mature as Thomas, Edward, Henry, Gordon, or others. He does still has the capacity and capability to be tenacious and mature, as shown in a few episodes like James Works It Out, The Queen of Sodor, and All in Vain, where he can at least get his least favorite jobs done if he has to. Even Journey Beyond Soda, James is more than capable to be serious and intelligent when he needs to be, such as searching for Thomas, even if he winds up getting captured himself and needing to be rescued. So, for the first round, at last, James versus both of them separately, Donald and Douglas. In case you missed out of the feats already before for the contenders in this matchup, well, to put it short, James pretty much takes most of those physical categories. No joke. Seriously, and in seriousness, of course. James, as said before, has shown a lot more than Donald and Douglas ever did physically. He takes strength, durability, attack potency, speed, and stamina, for instance, and any other. No explanation at all. Besides, should I mention that Donald and Douglas's bases, the 812 or 652, are realistically weaker than freaking Duck's spaces 5700? I would also add in Thomas's spaces, although I bet some people would scream in my ear though. For being stronger than Edwards, Donald and Douglas are pretty weak for the size against some tank engines. Of course, I know people are gonna claim otherwise with certain feats like... Hold on. In fact, let's talk about that overrated brake fan feats for Douglas, and probably Donald too, like him shoving that spiteful sod in the yard. So it is this feat that gives the stands the excuse that Douglas and Donald have a chance to contest against engines like James in this matchup, but let's analyze it a bit more closely in the model version. So, in that episode, James was losing steam and needed Douglas's help to bank his train. In that scene when they were on the hill, James had finally let up and stopped, while Douglas continued to move forward and pay attention. Douglas he could barely even budge the entire train uphill, not even an inch. And even if the spiteful brakeman had never broken apart, it is clear that Douglas was incapable of banking the train successfully, and eventually would have ran out of steam as well and failed, despite his determination. Automatic debunk. But what about a mentality like intelligence and skills? Thankfully, to be nice to Donald and Douglas, they have this in the bag as they are established and officially stated to be a hard-working, practical, level-headed, and are capable of performing any kinds of work, whether it be like goods works like balustrades or plowing through harsh winter conditions through snow. Douglas, for example, definitely has a lot. A few, to be exact, like rescuing Oliver and, of course, helping Donald from the pit. Though Donald is not far behind, despite being a bit more jokey and slightly more hot-tempered. An annual Donald and the Breakaway has him facing off against the runaway mainland trucks. Though that is unless you use CGI feats. Is where things get tricky, but thankfully I'm not using that crap, so. James, meanwhile, of course, despite his mature and hard working moments sometimes, especially in the older model era, is however still constantly held back down by his ego and narcissistic attitude. CGI really ramps it up to where he gets insufferable. The Apology Impossible episode was where it gets really disgusting. So with that, maybe they could outsmart and put James down in the ground. But what's important here to remember, however, is despite the better intelligence and skills, not just in this matchup, but in almost every other power scaling discussion, how exactly will it contest against James' superior physical performance? In short, skills means very little when power surpasses that immensely, and that you can't hurt the opponent when they are way too durable and powerful. Skills aren't everything in a power scaling discussion. To put it simply, Donald and Douglas are just horrendously feetless and mistreated by the official owner. Not even someone like Duck suffered that poorly. They have been neglected since season 7 by Hitera, and even to the Brenner era, which severely hampers their feats and scalings, horribly to the point where I could even argue Thomas and Duck could beat them. Even when they returned in the CGI era, it was a mere salt on their wounds as the characters were butchered to no end, which downgraded their intelligence and other skills. I mean, it may not be as bad as hypochondriac Henry, but it's certainly worse than the always grumpy and rude Gordon, for example. Heck, even Emily has much more to talk about in that same dumb episode with all three of them together. I refuse to call the name at the moment since it just sucks. So really, to me, it makes no sense to me on why people would try to wank them to a level inappropriate for them. It gets even worse when I see some try to bring in the fan-made stories. Yes, I'm telling you, fan-made stories of Donald and Douglas to justify them being above a certain worship diesel. A massive fallacy ever, if you ask me. Talk about being disingenuous. Like, the only reason they are able to be in the high tiers by most Thomas versus editors list or any other fans has to do with, of course, favoritism, bias, blind delusions, and whatnot. You thought James is overrated? Well, look at Donald and Douglas over there. When their fans when their fans ever get any funny ideas about the stations, Donald and Douglas are simply no better. At all. The fact that some people, or maybe even more, think that those Caledonian frauds can even tickle above someone like Henry and Gordon and maybe even Diesel 10 in an unironic and actually serious manner It is honestly pretty disgusting. Like, seriously, ex Bernadette's on Discord. Imagine putting the objectively even more fodder characters above the like of Spencer or Murdoch. But then again, no offense, but you also put Oliver and Salty above Thomas, which is automatically invalid. But besides that little rant, I think it is safe to say that Donald and Douglas are in pretty big trouble, if not the worstest trouble ever, against James. James just simply is superior overall, especially in physical performance as said before. Yes, he may not have the best brains, but it more than makes up for it with his bronze. He can take in as much pain or, dishes, as well as dishing it out. He's all mostly faster and stronger as well. Yada yada yada. It's not looking good for Donald and Douglas. The round one was just a mere wash. But one glimmer of hope appears to them. The final round. Them together versus James. What about a team up? As after all, as Nia said, two engines are better than one. Maybe they could gang bang James into submission with their combined might. Well, let's humor it. Well, with them together, there is a massive jump in power and combined intellect. Things are looking bright for them, right? Right? Well, if points counting is to matter in this matchup, even with that jump in strength, power, and intelligence, it is not exactly close to James' other hexes. What I mean by that is that James still has the durability, speed, faster speed, and of course, stronger attack potencies to deal with this. As in, despite being together, Donald and Douglas are still lacking in sufficient feats and achievement in terms of speed, hacks, endurance, stamina, and of course, overall brute force. Combined powers and skills just still isn't enough. Them being slower and less durable means they might not even produce the needed potency to clobber James. Their only best chance at defeating James is mostly smelting him, which, however, would be pretty impossible to do, considering, there hasn't been much feats or, of intelligence or skills where they're able to do that. Yeah, I said is to say this, but I'm going to say this, that even the team up isn't enough to close the massive power gap between them. Of course, people may say otherwise, and I will respect that, just as long as they are civil about it. But for the sake of this, James continues to prevail once more. For the final verdict, James beats both of them separately, no to low to maybe medium difficulty, and together, high to possibly extreme difficulty. That if you're wanting to be very generous and nice. Okay, maybe this may not be one-sided after all, but it's still a pretty bad slaughtering. Donald and Douglas's intelligence could only delay the inevitable. Of course, like what it did to Thomas vs. Duck, there's definitely going to be, angry rants from some people here and there, but cry and scream all you want. Donald and Douglas just simply ain't all of that. In addition, I wholeheartedly believe this matchup could definitely leave a bit of an important message. This is what happens when a character with much potentials gets neglected or mistreated, or even both. Like what Mattel did during Mattel's reign over Thomas the Tank Engine. This is what Donald and Douglas, as well as some others like Oliver and Duck, have to experience. Disappearing since season 7, for example, and then doomed to suffer horribly with barely anything to work with. No good feats of strength, no good feats of speed, no good speed of endurance, and no more and not much episode with them together to show more of their appearance. They're just scraping the bottom of the barrel for any relevancy. And I said it is to say, but but since the show has ended, we may never see Donald and Douglas ever officially do anything that will likely even rival James. I wonder how long it will be until James finally meets up with a certain blue tender engine his similar size in my discussion.